Let's begin. I will say good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dwayne Plaza. I'm the current president of the PSA and also professor of sociology from Oregon State University in the School of Public Policy. I want to welcome everyone to our very first PSA-sponsored Lightning Talk for 2024-25. My vision behind these talks when I first proposed them was to bring together a junior and a senior scholar to share their research in a particular thematic area of sociology. I wanted them to be essentially monthly, building up to the 2025 conference in San Francisco. I wanted to see these as sessions which continue the intellectual tradition of the association, which is coming up to, for many of you who don't know this, its 100th year anniversary. So I wanted to see us conveying and sharing of ideas and perspectives beyond really the 4 days that we normally meet physically. And with the normalization of Zoom since about the 2020 pandemic, having speakers online, delivering content and sharing ideas has really become a societal and cultural norm, so that no longer do we really have to travel, although we want to travel, and I certainly benefit from being in a space for 4 days to hear and interact with people. But Zoom really allows us to have that opportunity beyond those spaces that we actually have had in the past to spend time to listen to and to interact with people delivering papers or delivering ideas and getting feedback on those. So Zoom and Lightning Talks really are the future, in my mind, of the PSA, in addition, obviously, to its annual conference. Today's Lightning Talk is titled Solidarity in the Workplace. And essentially, our presenters will be looking at the current political election cycle. Labor solidarity often faces significant challenges because of American individualism. So when personal achievements and self-reliance are prized above collective effort, in such environments, the ethos of personal responsibility can really be undermined in the sense of unity necessary for effective collective action. So in general, then, American workers today are socialized to accept neoliberal ideas that they will do better in negotiations for better working conditions and equitable promotions as an army of one. We really have a time of false consciousness in the workplace, which prioritizes individual advancement over the shared goals, leading to fragmented efforts and weakened bargaining power. So unions, of course, have a difficult time in many colleges and university workplaces to cultivate that labor solidarity, because it involves emphasizing how collective action can enhance the success of all ranks of faculty. So join me then today in our two presenters, which are first Tyler Cohen and Professor Jung-Min Che. We, of course, have Jarvez Hall helping out in the background, and he will be operating the channel in a sense. But at this point, I would like everyone to just put in the chat what university you're from, or just what your affiliation is. So please go ahead and use the chat box just so we know who is here. Eventually, we'll use the chat box to also have you ask questions as this is going along. Put your questions in there. You can put your comments in there. I'll be moderating that, and eventually, using those to stimulate conversation with the speakers. In addition to that, we'll eventually also use the hands up icon, which will also allow you then to be put into a queue by myself to ask questions in the future. So next month, we also want to talk about that before we actually start. We'll also have another set of panelists who will be talking about the issues around gender and the issues around the next presidential election. And we'll have Professor Katie Bosenthal from Oregon State University and Dr. Darby Southgate from Los Angeles Valley College. So let me begin first by introducing Tyler Cohen. And Tyler is beginning his 5th year of graduate education at UC Riverside this fall. He's worked as a teaching assistant for sociological theory courses, sociology of labor movement, and social determinants of health. And he has taught courses on the sociological theory as well as sports, competition, and society. On the research side, Tyler works in the area of social determinants of health, focusing on time use in creative and physically active activities. Let me now introduce to you Professor Jung-Min Che. Professor Jung-Min Che is a professor of sociology at San Diego State University, who has just celebrated 30 years of university teaching. That deserves a real clap. He has published in the areas of social theory, race and racism, sociology of education and ethics. He loves to teach and has been the recipient of more than 20 Teaching Excellence Awards at SDSU since 2004, including the very prestigious Quest for Best Faculty 7 times. He's also published on a wide range of topics, such as postmodernism and race, assimilation, identity, Obama and education, computerization in society. His current research focuses on narrative medicine and community-based health projects. And most recently, that's not enough, Professor Jungmin Che is currently a volunteer faculty member teaching a course on Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed inside the Richard Donovan Correctional Institute facility in San Diego. So on a more personal note, Jungmin Che and I were in grad school together at York University in Toronto way back in 1992, 93, and 94. And so we've actually collectively known each other for 32 years. So it's really my honor to have both Tyler and Jung here to present their research to you all. And we're going to start first with Tyler. And so Tyler, please take it away.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction and for including me in this really exciting event. Is it all right if I share screen for my slides? It looks like it works. All right, so my presentation is titled Building Solidarity in an... There we go. Can you see my screen still? Is it still my slides? Yes, okay. Building solidarity in an individualized society, bridging labor and electoral politics. A lot of terminology in there, and I'll try my best to break it down as we go. I'm going to start by talking about the US labor movement, kind of a brief history, and then I'll talk about neoliberal ideology, neoliberalism, the policies associated with that, and how it connects to the individualization of society. I'm going to next talk about the relationship between labor and electoral politics today, and then finish, hopefully, on a more positive note, talking about the promise of solidarity and how it is a pathway towards the rights and infrastructure necessary for real, genuine self-expression and flourishing. So the labor movement in the United States has a long history, 2 centuries, and before World War II, it really was quite radical. A lot of overlap with socialist and communist movements. So there's some of the basic rights that we have as workers, whether that's ending child labor or the 8-hour workday, those types of things were victories of labor in its early days. The New Deal also really had a lot of socialist organizing behind it. Post-World War II, there's a bit more of an imperfect overlap with broader social justice efforts. So there are some positive notes that I want to highlight, in particular, the sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. They were on strike, demanding more dignity at the workplace, safer working conditions, and more time off and higher pay. And they sat in at City Hall and then had a march, and MLK gave a speech benefiting the workers, sadly, though, the day before he was assassinated. In California's Central Valley, there's also a really good story from labor organizing. The United Farm Workers are the result of organizing across ethnic barriers. So Filipino and Latino grape pickers overcame cultural and language differences to form the United Farm Workers, and it involves solidarity from the general public too by participating in a grape boycott. But this is not really the full story of labor organizing in the United States. There's some setbacks. And as you can see, this graph shows union density in the United States, and it peaked just towards the end of World War II and then really declined. And part of that involves the Red Scare, so socialism and communism kind of being a boogeyman in the United States. Socialist and communist leaders were purged from union leadership, so unions took a more moderate or conservative orientation. So from about a third of the US workforce being in a union, that really declined to be closer to about 10%. And just for some comparison, other countries such as Iceland, with a really unique economy, geographically isolated, a lot of state planning in their economy, they have almost full unionization. A place like Belgium, which is really relevant to the issue of electoral politics relating to labor organizing, they have 50% unionization still today. And that's largely a result of how easy it is to form political parties there. So you just have to fill out a form and then you get public funding for elections for your party based off of its votes from the previous election. Germany is an example of a European country that has been affected by neoliberal policies, which I'll break down a lot more soon. And something that my favorite sociological theorist, Zygmunt Bauman, likes to describe this type of phenomenon as is the separation of power and politics. So while power is a global thing detached from any one locality, money can be sent around the globe, politics remains stuck on the ground with local jurisdictions. So we know there's private and public sectors of the economy. In the United States, our public sector is still much more unionized than the private sector. So this is a sign that the public institutions we have that still have some attachment to our democratic process of voting, there's a much better opportunity for workers to organize and be in a union in the public sector than in the private sector today in the United States. Also, there's an uptick in unionization rates, and that's what I'll talk about at the end of this presentation. So neoliberalism, it's an ideology. It's also kind of a flavor of policies. Neoliberal policies involve the prioritization of capital over people by privatizing the economy, less state planning. It promotes reduced taxes on corporations and the wealthy and cutting of social spending. In effect, this is a redistribution of wealth and resources from working people to investors, like I just stated. And contrary to the deregulation rhetoric surrounding neoliberalism, it also involves a ton of red tape. It's not just hands off of the economy, but it's very precise management of the economy to make sure that capital can move freely while people have to dance around a lot of regulation in order to live their ordinary lives. And Zygmunt Bauman, in his 2001 book, The Individualized Society, argues that neoliberalism exacerbates individualization by placing the burden of economic success on individuals alone. And here, just earlier this week, that photo is from the New York Times podcast, and you can see some commentators discussing the decline of trust in public institutions. And they don't talk about neoliberalism explicitly, but they're also kind of advocating a further sustaining of neoliberal policies a little bit. So you see this disconnect, this tension, which I'll talk about when I talk about electoral politics some more. Individualization is an important term I should also explain. It's a societal phenomenon where people become increasingly reliant on their own decisions and resources to construct their identity. Individualization is a societal phenomenon, not an ideology, so it's separate from individualism. And Zygmunt Bauman explains it quite well, I think, in his book. He writes, to put it in a nutshell, individualization consists in transforming human identity from a given into a task and charging the actors with the responsibility for performing that task. It constrains the freedom of individuals by making them responsible for meeting their basic needs before being able to worry about more fun, interesting things in life, like expressing yourself. But people still want to make meaning out of life, even while they're struggling to get by. And as individualized consumers, we're influenced by marketing and advertising to buy things, focus on the short term. And all the while, all these key issues like finding housing, getting healthcare, transportation, even social things like finding community or avoiding loneliness, those types of things are battles that people have to fight all alone in an individualized society. And what we see with social bonds is that they become increasingly short-term and transactional, which is not quite the same direction as solidarity. In America, I definitely myself believe that the world, and America especially, is individualized in this day and age. But that is an empirical question and it's somewhat unexplored. And my hypothesis is that, yes, America is quite individualized and that people are oriented and dedicate more of their time and resources towards solving problems on their own rather than collective efforts to improve the conditions on offer, which is more like organizing for electoral politics or labor organizing, which are interlinked. And how are they interlinked? I would say through solidarity. Solidarity involves celebrating difference in self-expression, valuing other people, while also emphasizing collective responsibility over people's well-being, rather than just it being an individual lonely effort. To be more specific about what solidarity can look like in its best form today, I borrow from Jane McAlevey. Her 2016 book, No Shortcuts, is a really good book to help inform people about overlaps of electoral politics and labor organizing. And one strategy that she really highlights and concludes her book with is organic leaders, and paid organizers can identify organic leaders as people who are well respected and naturally gain their coworkers' trust in a workplace. Organic leaders then get trained by organizers and learn the skills and knowledge necessary to do successful campaigns, whether that's a unionization effort or bargaining for strong, powerful demands. And I'll talk about more of those things later, what those demands might look like. Some whole worker organizing evidence that I see firsthand. I see the Teamsters organizing delivery drivers. And then in my own union, the United Auto Workers graduate students, for our 2025 contract, our goal is to get at least 10% of our membership actively working as a leader, soliciting the input and opinions from their coworkers in their departments and neighboring departments so that our demands are accurate and true to the wants, needs, hopes, desires of our membership. So that's a bit of a picture of organizing on the grad student end of academia, but also it involves identifying a trend in academia where professionals are reliant on their individual identities and personal brands, which can be isolated, and it doesn't use competition in a very productive way. It's more of a toxic form of competition where people are fighting for finite resources and have to make their ideas look better than other people's ideas. This gets in the way of doing good science, in my opinion. On the electoral side of things, solidarity can be tough and it can be really tricky. And it's not finding solidarity and advocating for other people is not the same as solving a really tricky rational dilemma. But it is a tricky situation because of the litigiousness created by ballot access measures. So for new political parties in the United States in different jurisdictions, there are different numbers of signatures necessary to get on a ballot. And it can be hard for voters to vote with their hearts or vote for the policy proposals that most accurately map onto their desires. So it requires some extra effort, extra organizing, of course. But in the meantime, there are some voters' guides that can help voters vote more accurately to their desires. So to expand more on the connection between labor and electoral politics, some historical events. In 2022, in the span of a week, Joe Biden did one thing that was kind of good for labor and one thing that was kind of bad for labor. He started with the bad thing, though. Citing a law from the 1800s, he blocked railroad workers from striking for more sick days, and that prevented them to get that bargaining demand. So we have less safe railways with railroad workers not having any sick leave, just one personal day per year. And then on December 8th, Biden did something good for mostly Teamsters workers, this 200,000 number of people in a pension fund. They got their pensions secured through 2052 rather than them possibly going away. So that's a good thing, but it's sort of like ambiguous. There's some good and some bad, and it's an unclear situation how cooperative the Democrats are to labor, really, because they have a lot of really, really, really wealthy donors, and 2/3 of America's, if you compare just Democrats and Republicans, Democrats have about 2/3 of the wealth of that pie, of the wealth of all Democrats and Republicans. So Democrats are a little bit closer to capital than Republicans even. And so this year, Sean O'Brien, the president of the Teamsters Union, spoke at the Republican National Convention. This was a really interesting spectacle. I encourage people to watch this on YouTube. You can see, I'm pointing with my hand, but you probably don't see it on the screen here, but the faces of some of these people, these are elite Republicans attending the Republican convention, standing very close to Trump, and their faces are a little bit confused. Like, what? This guy's talking about fighting back against corporate power and restoring working class dignity. Are we sure we want this? It's an interesting spectacle. And then on the other side of the aisle, Sean Fain from the UAW had a strong speak at the Democratic National Convention, saying that the Democratic Party is the party of the working class. And that's encouraging to hear for people who want that to be true. But like I said, with the 2022 evidence, it's more of an ambiguous story than the labor movement would hope for. So there is more on the local level that I should highlight, and this is just one of many, many examples of labor organizers getting more involved in electoral politics. Betty Guardado from Phoenix, Arizona, or from Los Angeles originally. She's a city councilwoman for Phoenix, Arizona. She has a really inspiring story working as a housekeeper for hotels in LA, joining Unite Here, the union that is mostly made up of housekeepers, but also for stadiums, airports, big event places. Her successful unionization campaigns in LA moved over to Phoenix, more successful campaigns, and then she successfully organized independent voters to turn out the vote, and in 2019 was elected to Phoenix's city council. And this is my last point, the thing that I hope people will take away from this presentation in a way that is making the future seem like a future that could be possibly kind of good. Social movements seeking economic, gender, racial, and wider social justice, whether that's the Black Lives Matter movement or the climate justice movement, they're becoming disenchanted with duopoly. And since around 2016 or even before that, this recognition has gotten more and more salient amongst voters and workers. And workers always have latent power to disrupt the economy and withhold their labor power. That's a central part of the labor movement. And people are starting to do the extra work and the extra organizing necessary to connect these dots. A couple examples come from this summer class I was really lucky to join at the Teamsters Local 1932 in San Bernardino. And we were joined via Zoom by the Leo Panitch School for Socialist Education. And we talked about things like non-reformist reforms, which are policies that make it easier to organize in the future. It's not just a higher wage, which gives some workers more purchasing power for a little bit. It's the types of things like ranked choice voting or universal health care, which either change the political system to be more inclusive or help individuals be able to have what they need without having to individually fight for it all on their own. So these types of things could fall under the umbrella of universal rights and infrastructure. We also talked about envisioning a new party. It's a long ways away from having anything other than a duopoly in terms of presidential races and some of the big ticket races in America. But the way we can push towards this is through solidarity. And this comes from listening to people and trusting one another and finding ways, not in just a strategic sense, but to overcome our slight disagreements or maybe major disagreements to form a real force that believes in collective good and rights and a better world for all instead of just the profit motive. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Tyler, for stepping out and stepping off with a great presentation. You've probably generated a lot of questions. I see some in the chat already. Let's now turn it over to Professor Jung-Min Che to take over and take us home.
Hey, thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Dr. Plaza, for actually creating this space where we could actually connect this way. I had a lot of fun working with Tyler, And I know we are pressed for time, so let's actually get this thing going. Okay. Um, okay, am I sharing now?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Perfect. So, Tyler and I, we talked about this and we decided rather than kind of duplicating what about the labor unions and solidarity and so on, Tyler actually did more of the historical background and maybe even some of the strategies and some of the things that are going on right now. So we decided that maybe I will do the other part with respect to what are the ethics behind solidarity? So what are the theoretical framework that actually makes it, and I think Tyler mentioned individualization or individualism, not just simply as an ideology, but a social phenomenon. So what's the framework that actually allows for that kind of idea and ideology to be pervasive all over our like culture? Because I think that's very important, folks. So I'm going to be taking more of the theoretical perspective in trying to figure out what's the ethics behind neoliberalism, individualization versus ethics of solidarity. So here we go. Let's get this going.
Just
Um,
just throw your
I,
PowerPoint into presentation mode.
I'm sorry.
Just
Oh, you
put
know
your
what?
PowerPoint.
Right. I was gonna do that, but you know what? I like this because I also don't want to be surprised with the next one that's coming.
Okay. All right.
So
We'll
my
do it
students
here.
always make fun of me. They're like, "You're so non-tech savvy." That's okay because I
No
also don't
worries.
want to get surprised. I
No
like to
worries.
see what's the next slide. So, um, ethics of solidarity. And the title it says here, replacing an individualized world with an interconnected world. And on the bottom, I actually say there, I use replace opposed to replace because rather than switching out things that are already there via formal bureaucratic rules, as is often the case, there needs to be a pause, a time to evaluate clearly the concrete situation we face, a time for deliberation, as George W. Mead would say, a time for discussion, a time for dialogue to take place before finalizing any collective action. And I often do this before I start class. You know, I teach a class of 500 students, and I do this all the time as a reminder that, hey, we have to understand worldviews that guide us as our moral compass. And this is in Lakesh Alakin. It's a Mayan greeting. And let me just do this. Tú eres mi otro yo. You're my other me. Si te hago daño a ti, I do harm to you, me hago daño a mí mismo. I do harm to myself. Si te amo y respeto, if I love and respect you, me amo y respeto yo. I love and respect myself. Tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other me. I think this is very important, folks, because it sets the stage of the ethics that are involved in how do we understand solidarity. So for the last 30 years, Dwayne, you already mentioned that, we've been at this business for a while. For the last 30 years, every single talk that I've given.
Oh no. Mhm. Oh, I think we lost them.
Okay, I think my share just went away.
Okay. We lost you there for a second.
That's okay. That's okay. That's
We're back.
okay.
We're back.
This is
We're back.
what happens. Capitalists are always trying to get in the way of any kind of progress, right? And I'm not saying that's you, Jarvis. I'm just saying the technology. Oh,
See, here I am thinking you're gonna blame, the folks
no,
on
no, no, not at all.
YouTube,
We love you,
and now
Jarvis.
you're trying to put it on me. I'm the
No,
one.
absolutely not. We
I
love
see
you.
how
We
it
love
is.
you. You made the whole thing happen today. Normative education versus liberatory education. Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate the integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity. That's what majority of us have been actually experiencing through our schooling. So this actually becomes normative. Neoliberalism becomes normative. Capitalist becomes normative. Patriarchy becomes the norm. Or education becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which people deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation and liberation of their world. This is by Richard Shaw in the introduction for Paulo Freire. And obviously, they've both been influenced heavily by Marx. That's like Marx talking here. Within this framework, normative education supports a neoliberal world where the community actually is a myth. On the contrary, liberatory education supports a communal world where the collective is the foundation of any course of collective action, folks. So, real quickly, because I have more to say in the back, but this is what we call the normative worldviews that dominate individualized society. And I don't know if it's easier for you to see, but I have the circular thing where one thing reflects another. And majority of us have been socialized to believe that we are all alone, we go at it alone, and because we are individuals, we actually tend to see the world in a very atomistic way. In sociology, it's called nominalism. But the idea is atomism is the foundational source of how we live our lives, us and then everybody else. Everybody else in this particular worldview, folks, everybody else becomes an afterthought. It has to be me first and then everything else. And then if you actually make that circle a little bigger, then it's our family and then other families. Make that a little bigger, then it becomes our community, every other community. That's just a wrong way to go about this. And yet that's how we've been socialized. So then if you start from that, it automatically leads to the idea that I have to compete with all of my brothers and sisters and my family members. And I'm including everybody in here as my family. And you hear this all the time. What have you brought to the table? What do you bring to the table? Have you brought something to the table? Because the idea is, unless you bring something to the table, it is only normal that you become excluded. This is the kind of worldview that we're living in, folks. And the only result that we could have with this kind of a theoretical framework of how we view the world, how we exist in the world, is what we call the fake community. How can you have a real community based on solidarity when everybody else is either a myth or an afterthought? And that's the same kind of thing that I was just talking about. So then let me define, right, ethics of solidarity. Ethics of solidarity is not merely a technique or a method to placate the so-called masses or community members. This term has been commonly interpreted as simply consciousness raising. That's what a lot of people have done, right? It stems from the basic principles conscientização. It's a Portuguese phrase used by Paulo Freire. While this actually term has been used broadly as consciousness raising, it is way more than that. What this does is a process by which people have a clear understanding that subjective solutions cannot and should not be employed to tackle and solve an objective problem. This is really important, folks. This is the idea of sociological imagination, since we're all sociologists here. For example, the objective problem of poverty caused directly by capitalism cannot be solved by subjective solutions such as hard work or outcompeting others, which is a mainstay of a neoliberal society. And I absolutely see so many members in my community and all of my communities who engage in this type of cutthroat competition for personal survival rather than mutual salvation through collective action. The true upshot of ethics of solidarity is this. The starting point of any collective or social planning, folks, I'm not talking about your individual lives, okay? I'm not talking about whether you want to go to a mall or whether you want to eat In-N-Out or Burger King. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about in terms of understanding social planning is to engage with all of us in our communities, not only locally, but around the world, by validating their unique experiences, couched always within history. It has to be couched within history. while challenging them to break completely from adopting the values, the political, the social, the cultural, the legal, all of these values that are institutionalized, that have been set in place by those in positions of power, such as neoliberalists, like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, who absolutely killed the unions, right? When they got elected as prime minister in 79 and as president in 1980. So people should not confuse what's going on in today's society, right? The socio-political reality that we have today with what can be the philosophical ideals that must be pursued if the goal is to be liberated collectively as human beings. So the saying, and it's even entered our vernacular, right? It is what it is. What that does is it absolutely undermines even the possibility of a change. How could change actually happen when it is what it is? And you know what the damnedest thing about this is? The damnedest thing about this is people who absolutely need change, the working class, people of color, minorities. I actually hear many of my own community members saying these kind of things. It is what it is. I understand them. I empathize and I feel, but you can never take that stance, folks. So then what's the alternative? Here it is, right? And this is it, replacing normative worldviews with transformative worldviews. And I know it's hard to see all of these things, so I'm going to go to the next slide. And this is exactly what's in here is here. In Lakesh Alakin, we just mentioned that. You're my other me. Mitakuya Oyasin. This is from the Lakota Sioux. All my relations, sacredness of all, everything, including animals, mountains, rivers, plants, earth, everything exists in relationships, folks. None of these things exist isolated. And yet we don't think of it this way. And, again, the crazy part of this is think about where the Lakota Sioux, they're in the Black Hills Mountains. And we've taken their holy actually land. And what we did was beyond, right, absurd. What we've done was not only have we actually ravaged, raped, pillaged, killed, maimed, and engaged in genocide of many, many, many indigenous populations, but after we've done that, we actually etched in stone, so it could not be erased, on the side of their holy mountain that gives them spirit, that gives them life, that gives them water, that gives them everything. We've etched the four faces of the people who engaged in this kind of unspeakable violence. Can you imagine that, folks? And this is why I say socialization is so important, education is so important. In what kind of a world would people do that unless that became normative, unless violence is normative, unless colonization is normative, unless domination is normative? I mean, in some ways, this is related to even something like fracking, where they drill literally to the middle of earth and is absolutely pulling out the bone marrows. Can you imagine somebody coming in and drilling into your skin, into your bone, and taking out the marrows? Are we surprised then why our world, even the physical world, is every day gasping for air? And why our physical world is not in good health? I mean, this is really a no-brainer. And yet it's gotten into our lexicon where many of us actually even talk about who's your, right, Mount Rushmore, as if that's the highest point of existence, right? Who's your Mount Rushmore of basketball? Jordan, Kobe, and so on. Who's your Mount Rushmore of philosophers? We've got to stop using those kinds of languages because we got to reverse this immediately. And so you have something like Namaste. I know most of you have been introduced to Namaste through some kind of yoga. This is at the basis to how people in Nepal and East India and parts of the Middle East would relate to each other. Imagine the idea is when I meet you, I bow down to the divine in you. If I bow down to the divine in you, I have no time to think about ways to exploit you. I am busy uplifting you. I'm busy respecting you. And again, somebody like Martin Buber, a Jewish scholar, where he talks about the Das Vision. He says all relations exist in the space between you and me. That's where everything exists. And yet, we violate that sacred space by saying we should live our lives as atoms, as individuals. And of course, in Africa, Ubuntu, it says, I am because we are. And many of you are familiar with yin and yang, Taoism, and it's again actually understood as opposites. Absolutely not. Yin and yang are not opposites, folks. They're complementary. And finally, a concept that I've been working on for the past several years, arirang, is a concept that embodies the entirety of human experiences that are manifested and even more importantly, yet to have been realized, the potential in us. The point here, folks, is that all these ideas of interconnectedness exist and have existed for millennia, but they have been exiled by the concept of individualism, individualization, propagated intentionally and dominated by the concept of enlightenment through colonial powers. I'm almost done here, folks. How do I know that? It says conclusion. So, ethics of solidarity must employ any and all of the transformative worldviews that we have just mentioned that are consistent with the fundamental idea put forth by Marx, that we exist in the social. We don't exist anywhere else, folks. We exist in the social as social beings who must accompany each other. That is our historical vocation, both as a singular and collective human beings. And appropriate to this talk to unions and collective action, I'll end this talk with two sentiments. One, Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach. Hitherto, Marx says, up till now, he says, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And two, Simone de Beauvoir's take on human freedom and work. This is what she says. Those of you who are interested in women's studies or sexism or patriarchy will hardly ever get a chance to be introduced to Simone de Beauvoir, who, by the way, is a foundational writer and ideas that she produces that underpins all the ideas of modern day sexism or the idea of resisting sexism and the ideas of patriarchy. She's the foundational idea that resists all of these, and yet you will hardly ever be introduced to her. And this is what she says. Human freedom requires the freedom of others. Imagine that. Of everyone, if it is to be actualized. And this can be done, and this can be actualized if we organize our society so that work is done as a community service, not for personal profit. That's it for me, folks.
All right. Well, thank you both, Professor Jungmin Che, and thank you also to Tyler. I actually have 3 questions so far in the chat, and what I want to do now is just start down in order of how they arrived. And I'm also going to allow folks to put up their hands now or to go ahead and put more questions in the chat. So let's go first with Lydia. This person asks, what good is a union if they appear to be on the side of the company's interest instead of the employee? How do you make sure the unions are truly there to do the best for the group instead of just individuals they like? And I'm going to put that on to Tyler first, please, with a comment.
Okay, thank you. I think Jane McAlevey in her book, No Shortcuts, has a much more thorough and enticing answer to this question. But the top-down more technocratic approach to running unions that was prevalent in the second half of the 20th century, it would make a lot of concessions with the companies that workers were employed at. But by using more of a whole worker organizing approach, unions can be more centered around the perspectives and hopes and desires of the actual workers within them. And this is hard work. It's not just something that's like, oh, great, it's done. There are problems where people have very divergent opinions within a workforce, and it takes a lot of extra time and energy. So these rights that can be universalized for people to, I mean, just like in the late 1800s, the 8-hour workday, saving enough time that people can start engaging outside of just the toil associated with work. So there's multiple steps and it's hard work, but definitely the top down, just we're going to tell you what's best approach is not going to help in terms of that question. Thank you for asking that.
And I'll do a quick follow-up to that. And I understand and appreciate the question because yes, unions these days seem to be more of a middleman or the mediators, right, between the corporations and the workforce. And they have not been as progressive or radical as they should be. So having said that, I guess one of the things about unions is still we live in a reality where either you have to bargain your work individually or collectively, right? And as much as I have issues with some of the unions and their philosophy behind all of these kind of things, I would still rather, right, fight collectively, have unions engage in collective bargaining versus me fighting against either the corporations or any of the workforce. And by the way, and I always say unions do not, and they've lost their teeth long time ago because they gave up on the idea and they made even that almost illegal within unions, the wildcat strike, the ability to shut down work immediately by the workers. As long as you don't have the wildcat strike as a threat, why would the corporations ever be scared,
Mhm.
right? So that's my 2 cents.
That's a great point. I'm going to go on to the next question by Jelger, and it starts with Tyler. How would you relate your concept of solidarity with developing member agency in the union, members taking initiative and bringing their own stories and passions beyond supporting the union's call for action?
Yeah, that's a good question. In my own workplace as a graduate student, there's so many varieties of academic disciplines where people are working and people have just different experiences. There's a big difference in the legal and official reality faced by different graduate students based on their documentation status as well as international student status. So one thing we're bargaining for this year is much more rights for our international student comrades, peers, colleagues, and solidarity involves, in my opinion, it involves just a lot of work. It's not just listening to people. It's a lot of working through differences of perspective. So that's my answer.
Okay, great. Professor Jungmin Che.
Yeah, so quickly, with respect to that as well, in terms of unions, I think many of the unions also have adopted the bureaucratic models of organization. And that's just all because it's based on the idea of instrumentalism, the idea that we could get some of these things done. Again, what needs to happen, and this is a long-term goal, but as we move to it, we always have to have a goal where we could reach. What has to happen is the ethics of solidarity has to be pervasive in unions and union memberships so that it is a lateral organization ultimately rather than a vertical organization, right? So in that sense, even in terms of union memberships, we got to get rid of all these hierarchical even terminologies, right? We don't need leaders. What the hell does that even mean, right? Benjamin Barber used to have a saying, we are neithers nor followers. So in these kinds of things, we also have to understand unions also cannot be following the bureaucratic models of organization because of something called efficiency. That's got to go. Human life is not always about efficiency, right?
Mhm.
So it's got to always be lateral. Everything has to be a lateral relationship.
Mhm. Thank you very much for that. And we have a question from Harry Marsman. Uh, in general, we'll start with Tyler again. Isn't solidarity impossible in a world where social media and algorithms increase the likelihood of personal bubbles that are opaque and thus we no longer even see each other? After all, we cannot even agree on facts, in quotes, much less direction or shared political action. No comment on that, please.
That's
Tyler.
such a good question. I think of Naomi Klein's recent book, Doppelganger, and her concept of mirror worlds, where just that people don't agree on the facts. There's the basis of reality, of understanding reality anymore. And part of that is social media echo chambers. Uh, it's definitely a big problem. I think that the tech companies that use the profit motive to provide this social infrastructure for us is just one possibility, though. There's also the possibility, and there are some apps that, like if you use Signal for a group chat or something, there are some apps that are a bit more horizontally structured, and they're not worried about advertising revenue. And that could limit some of the sensationalist clickbait type of media content that is quite divisive. Also, nothing's ever going to be perfect, and I think that's a point from Zygmunt Bauman that I really appreciate from him. That you notice a healthfully functioning democracy when people think, oh, this isn't really democratic enough. So it's this constant effort, more and more people making the effort to be like, yeah, let's see what these people of a different political party than I, or different stance on an issue from I, what do they have to say, and what are the moral underpinnings of what they have to say, and just that effort to try to understand other people. It's a North Star to kind of be mindful of and shoot towards. But I don't think there ever is a final destination. We're never going to live in a perfect society where everyone gets along and agrees on things. We're always going to be sorting things out. And solidarity is just a direction. It's just an ideal. It's something that feels great in the moment when you notice stuff clicking, but it's not a perfect destination that we can just exist within permanently.
All right, thank you.
No, with respect to, and I again, the question is that yes, we are living more and more in a severed world, right? That through mass media and all of these kind of things. But I think one of the things that we have to remember, that's not a natural phenomenon, folks. That's intentionally designed by those people in positions of power. And we don't talk about power enough. This actually is being disseminated through power. Our educational institutions have been absolutely hijacked by neoliberal ideologies through power. So when we actually understand these kind of things, this is why education is so important. Rather than schooling, we go to schools, folks, but we hardly get educated. And this is from all the way through from Plato's time, right? Education, the idea is educere. The idea is that you're supposed to be pulled out from the darkness of ignorance, right? So yes, when somebody says we cannot even agree on certain facts, that's fine, but that's because we have been alienated, like Marx says, and operating under false consciousness. How is it possible that capitalism, the very notion, the very fabric of capitalism, can only exist when it exploits? If you know that, then how can we actually then have differing opinions other than somebody says, I enjoy being exploited? And nobody says that. It's just that they don't understand clearly what capitalism is. So this is where education becomes quite important, right? And again, yes, it may seem improbable, it's difficult, right? But again, I think nothing is impossible. And I don't mean that in terms of like, hey, nothing is impossible. I really mean that we really have to we got to roll up our sleeves and really be able to educate, right? Everyone up in a very clear manner, the kind of institutional ideas and oppressive things that are actually dominating us.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to just read a comment here that Lydia had put in earlier on, and she says, or they say, start with the revolution in education, teaching as a class, meaning a class will not graduate unless they help each other, a class instead of individuals, no grade, just understand the subject and creatively encourage students to collaborate together what they do not understand because they have each other to work with. Passing a grade as a group will then encourage solidarity as opposed to individualism. So it's a very interesting proposal that they are putting forth. Because if you think about, say again.
Can I comment on that real
Oh yeah,
quick?
yeah, sure.
A very important part right here, right? So then we actually have to take that, and I appreciate that idea, and let's make it bigger, right? Look, like I said, it's intentional that only a few percentage of the population will ever get educated because why? Intentionally, they made a cost to education, thereby eliminating majority of the working class to begin with. So that's intentional. Second thing, we can't continue to understand education and place of being educated as still something that we could actually consume and like purchase. There should be one and only one criterion for anybody to enter any space of education. I'm talking about universities anywhere. And that singular criteria should not be your GPA, should not be anything other than your willingness to learn. If you're willing to learn, then you actually have a right to be educated. That's a human right around the world, right? So forget about all of these rankings and all of that. I always laugh at that, right? Stanford or Harvard always saying we have the creme de la creme, we have the best of the best. I'm like, shut up, man. Because why? Take the people who actually, again, traditionally are getting D's and F's and so on and so forth. Take these students and actually, right, make them shine. Now I might give you some like credibility, as a Stanford Cardinal, right? What are you doing? Taking the fastest runners and saying, look at us. We're the fastest group of people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's
I have the
all
same.
gotta change. Singular criterion, nothing else to be actually enrolled in a university, your willingness to learn.
Interesting perspective. I also have the same feeling about honors colleges that exist on my campus and all the other campuses, where we give the most resources to the honors college. We give the best teachers to them. And these are oftentimes identified as the elite students to begin with. And we only make them better. And the other students are forced to be in a class with 200 people or 150 people learning the same topic as opposed to the honors college students. So let me ask one more or make a statement from Harry Marsman. Isn't solidarity impossible in a world where social media and algorithms increase the likelihood of personal bubbles that are opaque, and that thus we must no longer even see each other? Right. So he really wants you to comment on that aspect.
Yeah. Tyler, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, the same type of thing with I think Naomi Klein helps us a lot with her book Doppelganger and identifying that mirror worlds do exist and recognizing that, sometimes just identifying a social problem that's something that affects society as a whole, not just certain individuals. And as more and more individuals are cognizant of that, then they can make efforts to be solidaristic.
Can I actually flip that? That question in itself comes from the assumption that we are, again, starting point of individuals. Our real natural way of existence is through solidarity. How they've made us sever from each other is the most unnatural thing to be in a human-like relationship. So let's actually reframe that, right? Isn't solidarity impossible? No. That is how we're supposed to actually live with nature, with mountains, with you, with me, right? So how has it been made that we've been so alienated that we start from the position of wanting to make a bridge to you? I don't exist unless you exist. My identity is nothing without the existence of everybody else, right? Like Ubuntu. I am because we are. How do I know if I'm tall or short or ugly or this and that unless you exist?
Yeah.
Right?
So many.
Solidarity not only is possible, it is the most natural of the human conditions.
Absolutely. So on that note, we're about to end only because we're running out of time, but I'd also like to just add one more historical note to that statement that Professor Jungmin Che just said, and that is, we have been a human species for almost 2 million years. And of that 2 million years of total time, only the last 100,000 years have we had this idea of not having solidarity. Before that, of course, human beings were prey to animals, they were prey to the environment, and they had to figure out how to work within the environment to actually survive. But on that note, I won't get a chance to ask or allow anybody else to say anything because we've run out of time. But I want to thank our first two speakers, Tyler Cohen and Professor Jung Min Che, for taking their time to prepare their presentations and to now come here and share their knowledge with us. We really had a great opportunity to share with each other, and I want to invite you back in October for another great presentation, I hope, which will be really focused on the whole issue of gender issues in the coming election, and more specifically, looking at the ways in which gender needs to be at the forefront of much of our lenses and analysis of American society. So thank you much again, everyone. Let's give a round of applause again to our speakers.
Good
And a
job,
round of applause to
Tyler.
you all.
Good job, Dr. Che. Thank you so much for your help, everybody. And Dr. Che, especially, thank you. This has been a really great experience.
Yeah.
Dr. Plaza, and thank you, Jarvis.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Jarvis, you can sign us out. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. You can watch this recording actually right now over on our YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell so that you can get notifications of any postings that come up. Feel free to go to our website as well, pacificsocial.org, and register for PSA PSA 2025 in San Francisco. Registration is open now, and the call for submissions is open. Be sure to submit. October 15th is the deadline for those who are professionals or graduate students. So make sure you submit those by October 15th. That is almost less than 3 weeks away. And then for undergrads, the submissions are due November 1st. So please feel free to go ahead and get those in and register for PSA 2025 today. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.